So I'm with Reza Aslan, who is the author of the new book Zealot, about a biography of Jesus, if you will, an historical look in a very different way than has ever been done at the life of Jesus and who he really was and the movement that he started. And so Reza, a lot of my readers and viewers are young women, Generation X, millennials, and a lot of them are sort of post-Christian in a sense. They were raised in the Christian tradition, but as they have grown into young women who have very different lives, they have problems reconnecting with the faith that they were raised in, but specifically because of how women are often viewed and treated. And there's a huge gap between their real life and their traditions. So I'm really curious what your book can say to young women, and if a Muslim man can help young Christian women find Jesus.
Well, let me say this first of all. We have to recognize that there is a difference between faith and religion. Faith is indescribable, it's undefinable, it's ineffable. You're talking about an experience of transcendence, something that literally cannot be put into words. And so what religion does is it provides the language with which you can express this undefinable experience. And that language is made up of a set of symbols and metaphors. That's what religion is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be a signpost to God, as the Sufis refer to it. The path, but not the destination. The problem, of course, is that religions are the product of human institutions. And as human institutions, they are privy to the same socio-economic and political motivations as any other human institution is. And certainly throughout history, they have been dominated, not just Christianity, but every religion, been dominated by men. Men who have interpreted the religion in such a way to empower them, and often at the expense of women. So there's nothing unique about the patriarchy that one finds in Christianity. It's the same patriarchy that one finds in every religion. So there should at least be a little bit of comfort in knowing that it doesn't matter.
No comfort, Reza.
Yeah, it doesn't matter which religion you adhere to. They all more or less tend to crap on women, in particularly in roles of power to different degrees. So the reason I say this is because I always try to remind people that prophets are not inventors of religion. Jesus did not invent Christianity. His followers invented Christianity. Muhammad did not invent Islam. His followers invented Islam. The Buddha did not create Buddhism. His followers created Buddhism. Prophets are reformers. Their job is to take the religious and cultural and political and social milieu in which they live and to recast it, to redefine it, to challenge it. And particularly in the case of Jesus, part of that challenge was to try to flip the social order on its head. This is a time in which women are not even people.
Right.
They're not even, far from being citizens or from being, equal members of society, they're essentially property to be owned and traded, bought and sold, essentially, which is what marriage was, the buying and selling of women for the purpose of procreation. And so it's enormously significant that a huge proportion of Jesus' disciples, we are told in the Gospel of Luke that he had 72 disciples. A huge proportion of them were women. That, as Luke actually says, that these women, about 6 or 7 of whom are named, which is incredible. If you think about it, the fact that these women are actually given names is
very
phenomenal.
Subversive.
Right, it's incredibly subversive. We know who they were. that they traveled from town to town with Jesus, which was the definition of a disciple, was that person who, rather than waited for Jesus at a city, went from city to city with him. That they were the only ones who showed up at the cross, that the men hightailed it out of there and the women stuck around.
Right.
That they were the first witnesses to the empty tomb in all 4 gospel traditions, regardless of the fact that the later gospels try to apologize for that by immediately getting men involved. Right? In the Gospel of Mark, the women are the only witnesses to the empty tomb. In the Gospel of Matthew, when the women witness the tomb, the first thing that they do is go get the men, so that there's an actual, because at that time women were not considered witnesses.
They couldn't
Right.
be relied upon. Right.
Right. All of that, despite the fact that it has been tried, that the Christian institution, the patriarchal institution of Christianity, has tried desperately to brush it under the rug, are things that even the gospel writers, even the church fathers, and they were all fathers, who canonized these scriptures, couldn't hide. They couldn't get around it. It's still there. And I think that the path to female empowerment in truly following the example of Jesus lies in the Gospels itself.
A recent Barna study was showing that women in particular have made this huge spiritual shift. And Christian women, the numbers of Christian women who read the Bible has dropped significantly. Women who go to church dropped significantly. Women who take the Bible literally has dropped significantly. And it's fascinating the way you sort of imagine the symbols and metaphors and sort of the coming of a new language that can kind of free up Jesus from a lot of this theologizing and doctrinization that he's been trapped in. How do you see these metaphors and this language working for women and reclaiming Jesus and reclaiming our faith? Because at the end of this study that I'm quoting from Barna, 2/3 of women still say their faith is important to them regardless. So how do you see this taking shape?
Well, I think it's important to understand that these symbols and metaphors were developed by the church, by the institutions, as a means of helping the faithful understand and put into some framework for their lives the teachings of Jesus. But that means that they are historical constructs. In other words, what the cross meant in the year 340, when these scriptures are about to be canonized, and what it means in the year 2013 are 2 vastly different things. That symbols by definition are meant to be malleable. They're supposed to be understood in variable ways depending on who is encountering them. That's why they matter. That's why they exist for so long, precisely because of that malleability. And so there shouldn't be anything standing in the way of any kind of marginalized group, whether it's queer communities or immigrant communities or non-Orthodox communities or women, to simply reabsorb the symbols that were provided 2,000 years ago and to reinterpret them according to their own needs. That's what they were made for.
And we sort of flipped that somewhere along the
Right.
centuries. It really got flipped.
Well, what happened is that the symbols and metaphors became the whole point of it all. In other words, we confuse the path for the destination, as the Sufis would say. The great Christian mystic Meister Eckhart once said that if you focus too narrowly on a single path to God, all you will ever find is the path. And this is a Christian who is saying this. And I think that's what's happened. When people say things like, I believe in the Bible, or I believe in Christianity, or I believe in Islam, I'm so confused by that statement, because these are not things to believe. God is the thing to believe. These are just signposts. These are just means of getting to know God. They are the path, not the destination.
And you talk a little bit in the book about how the ancient community would have understood the Gospels as they were first being written in the mythical sense, as myth as opposed to history. And that was completely acceptable because what they cared about was not the factual details of what happened, it was the truth that underlies that.
Yeah.
Is that something that we could maybe learn a lesson from?
For sure. It's such a tragedy that the word myth in our modern parlance has become synonymous with falsehood, because that's not what myth means. The primary definition of myth is simply stories of gods and goddesses. That's what myth means. And these stories, in many ways, were by their definition true, insofar as what they revealed were not facts to be verified, but truths to be recognized and understood. This notion that we do nowadays, where we separate fact from truth, where we think that that which is true is that which can be empirically verified, is a very new idea. It's a new phenomenon. It's a product of the modern age. That's not how the ancient mind thought. It's certainly not what the gospel writers believed. For them, fact and truth were two separate things. The stories, the myths that they wrote about, they never intended to be read as what we would today refer to as historical facts. The facts were unimportant to them. What was important was the truths of it. This is an incredibly difficult concept for modern people to understand, and I get that. But you have to think about it this way. If we were living 2,000 years ago, and I wanted to make a point about you, Jennifer. I wanted to say that, you know, Jennifer is the most compassionate person that I know. I wouldn't say Jennifer is compassionate. What I would say is, one day Jennifer went outside and saw a homeless man who was freezing in the cold and who didn't have a jacket, and Jennifer took off her jacket and gave it to the homeless man and walked away. Now, did that actually happen? Who cares?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. That's not, the ancient mind wouldn't understand the question.
Right.
They wouldn't get what you mean. They're like, what do you mean? The facts are not what's important. The truth revealed by the story I just told is important. And the truth is that Jennifer is so compassionate that she sacrifices of herself for other people. That's how the Gospels were written. We know that sometime around 50 CE, or AD as Christians say, there was a collection of Jesus' sayings. We called this collection Q. Right. Which is German for, it's Quelle, which is German for source. And what this document was just a bunch of Jesus' words, right? Quotations of Jesus, the greatest hits.
Just jotted down.
Just jotted down and passed around in this early community. What very likely happened is that when Mark in the year 70 or 71 sat down to write his gospel, he took these quotes and he turned them into stories. So in other words, what he took was this quote in which Jesus says, you know, man was not built for the Sabbath was made for man. And that's it. And he said, one day Jesus and his disciples were walking, you know, through a field, and his disciples picked the grains of wheat on the field and they started eating them, and the Pharisees saw and they said, hey, it's the Sabbath, you're not allowed to work on the Sabbath. And Jesus said, man was not made for the Sabbath was made for man. Did that event actually happen? Mark wouldn't know what you mean by that question. Like, what do you...
Wouldn't even occur to him.
Yeah, it wouldn't occur to him what he would say is, you missed the point. The point is the truth revealed by this story.
The essence.
That's what we call the Gospels.
And that's much like how I read your book. You really pull out the essence. And I think, you know, that's really kind of what we start to miss today
Mm.
with Christianity, and what a lot of Gen X and millennials are looking for to reclaim. So
I've said it before and I'll say it again. I truly believe that you can be a follower of Jesus and not be a Christian, just like you can be a Christian and not be a follower of Jesus.
Well, amen to that, brother. Thank you so much
Thank you, Jennifer.
for being with
My
us
pleasure.
today, Reza. Thanks.